These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious, whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted to while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael, as Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X, and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sekou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sekou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the civil rights movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a black power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've got a lot on the program today. Our one guest will be Professor Richard Wolff in our second hour. I want to ask him, what is financialization and how has it damaged America? It plays into my rant today, which I'll get to in a minute. But it's a large issue. And Professor Wolff, of course, Professor of Economics, I'm looking forward to seeing what he has to say about that in our second hour. Also in our second hour, let's stop calling January 6th an insurrection. This was an actual attempt to overthrow the government of the United States. That's treason, and it's properly called a coup. We'll get into that in the second hour. In the third hour of our program, what damage can the new banning books movement bring? And we've got a geeky science about how coffee and tea can save your brain. It's absolutely fascinating. But to start out our day here, my rant over at HartmannReport.com is titled, What is the Wealth of a Nation? And, I think this is a really important point. What is and to point out that it's time to break the curse of Voodoo Economics and return to manufacturing at the core of our economy if we want to make our country wealthy. So, let me just lay this out. China, the news hook, as it were, for this story today is that it was reported this week that late last year, early this year, China surpassed the United States as the wealthiest nation in the world. What does that mean? Does that mean they have the most money in their checking accounts? Turns out, no. It means they have the most actual wealth. Now, yeah, money represents wealth, but that's not what this is about. What is, for example, your wealth? I mean, look around you. If you're at home, you're seeing a living room with furniture, a television. In the kitchen, there are appliances, dishes, cookware. Rooms have beds, desks, bookshelves, tools, computers. The house sits on a foundation. It's made out of 2x4s and sheetrock and copper wiring and plumbing and siding and roofing. All of that is wealth. This is all stuff that has value. Value in this sense isn't cost. Cost, the value is intrinsic to the items themselves, their ability to make life better for us. They were purchased at a particular time at a particular price with something else of value, for example, money in exchange for hours of your work. But because most of them are manufactured goods that will last for years, decades, maybe even centuries, they represent lasting wealth. And all of them together, your home, all the stuff in it, that's part of your wealth. Now add your home to all the others in the country of all sizes and shapes and all sorts. Add in the commercial space in the country, all the buildings, the farms and the farmland, everything touched by human hands or machinery. And what you have basically is the wealth of the nation. So how does a nation create wealth? Well, if there's a factory down the street that's taking in freshly sawed wood and turning it into furniture, they're literally creating wealth. They're taking the raw material of a forest, they're applying human labor to it, and they're producing things of lasting value. That's wealth. But what if they're making hamburgers instead of furniture? I mean, it's a continuous thread from nature to your mouth, right? Plants are grown, they're fed to animals, the animals are slaughtered, they're processed, they're added to pickles and tomatoes and onions and lettuce and buns, and poof, you've got, ketchup, you've got a hamburger. But does that represent wealth? No, it doesn't. And this is the difference between a manufacturing economy and a service economy. Ronald Reagan notwithstanding, I realize he tried to reclassify McDonald's as a manufacturing facility because our manufacturing numbers started falling off the edge of the earth in the 1980s. But creating burgers doesn't create any more wealth than if I loaned you $1,000 and you paid me back $1,100 with, $100 interest. Does that create wealth? Well, it puts $100 in my pocket, but where'd it come from? Did it get created out of nowhere as a result of human labor, like, turning a piece of wood into a piece of furniture? No, it didn't get created. It got transferred. That $100 interest was transferred from you to me, or vice versa if you had loaned me the money. That's called financial activity, right? As Adam Smith wrote in his book Wealth of Nations back in 1776, well, actually, the title of the first chapter of his book lays it out. He was into long titles. And this was the title of the first chapter, quote, "Of the causes of improvement in the productive powers of labor and of the order according to which its produce is naturally distributed among the different ranks of the people." In other words, the productive power of labor is what produces wealth. Adam Smith wrote, this is a quote from his book, Wealth of Nations, "The most opulent nations indeed generally excel all their neighbors in agriculture as well as in manufacturing, but they are commonly more distinguished by their superiority in the latter, in manufacturing, than in the former, in agriculture." When Reagan tried to call fast food manufacturing, William Sarin in the New York Times called him out. This was May 31st, 1982. The title was, the headline in the New York Times, "Big Mac supplants Big Steel as manufacturing jobs lag." Quote, "When steel is made, for example, jobs are provided not only in the steel mills, but ultimately in the production of items made from steel, such as cars, farm equipment, home appliances, and in the sale and repair of those items. When a hamburger is sold, it's merely consumed. No further jobs are created. But jobs in the steel industry decreased 14%, and today the industry has 30% unemployment." Keep in mind, this was the Reagan 80s, as our country began to collapse under the burden of Reagan's neoliberal ideas. I lived and studied in Beijing back in November of 1986, and I remember standing in Tiananmen Square. There's this giant, a major road, like a 10, 12 lane road, just kind of across the way from Tiananmen Square. And I remember standing there in Tiananmen Square and watching this ocean of black bicycles. Keep in mind, this was 1986. An ocean of black bicycles. Maybe every 10 minutes, a single car would go by. They were always black limousines. They were government officials. The air was thick with smoke from coal, which was piled, these coal briquettes were piled in neat little 3-foot tall pyramids on the back streets, on the residential streets. And everybody heated just one room in their house. This was November. No skyscrapers, no neon lights, no vibrant storefronts. The streets were covered with coal dust. The houses and apartments were gray and drab, and everybody dressed the same in cheap cotton clothing. That was 1986 in China. The very next year, Deng Xiaoping decided to reject neoliberalism, being pushed on him by Reagan and the Chicago schoolboys, and instead threw in with Alexander Hamilton's American plan. I've talked about this a lot. And China now creates wealth by making things. And as a consequence, now that they have all this wealth, when we buy things from them, we give them dollars. What do they do with the dollars? Well, you have to spend dollars ultimately in the United States because we created them. So they bring the dollars back to the United States, and they buy our real estate. In just 2017 through 2018, they picked up 80,000 U.S. residential properties, which is driving up the price of real estate. They're buying our company. Remember Smithfield Foods? The company where Donald Trump ordered workers back to work. They've got 500 farms across the United States. They call them farms. I call them factory farms. They're owned by China or Chinese. 40% of the asset values of all companies in America now are foreign owned. Why? Because we are not making things here anymore. This whole Milton Friedman's whole neoliberal free trade agenda has just devastated America. We've sold off our companies and our real estate to foreign interests, and now we've got these so-called supply chain disruptions, and everybody's trying to blame this on Biden. Isn't it amazing? All the media, supply chain disruptions, Joe Biden's in trouble. Well, why do we have supply chain disruptions? Because we have a supply chain to Asia. Why do we have a supply chain to Asia? Reaganomics. Neoliberal free trade policy. Reagan renegotiated the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Reagan and Bush negotiated NAFTA. And yeah, Clinton signed it and went along with the program. I mean, nobody has pushed back on this other than Trump, and he did it in a completely incompetent, totally confused way. So basically, there's been no effective pushback on this since the 80s. In 1975, we had a $16 billion trade surplus. Now we're averaging $700 billion a year in a trade deficit, which means that basically every year, another $700 billion of America gets sold to some, to people, businesses, or governments outside the United States. Finance doesn't make a damn thing. Nathan Lewis in Forbes, he said, our financial system is basically a bloated parasite. During the 60s, the financial industry accounted for 6.2% of all employment income, 14% of corporate profits. By 2014, it accounted for 12.5% of all employment income and 26% of all corporate profits. And finance doesn't make a damn thing. We've got to start manufacturing again in the United States. We've got to start manufacturing in the United States. What we need is an honest debate about how to make that transition. Nobody's even discussing it. Instead, they're sitting around complaining that Joe Biden hasn't been able to magically fix the supply chain that 40 years of Reaganism brought us. How is this a good thing? We have to begin talking about this. We'll be back at 17 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls and more of the news of the day. I also want to get into why is the media hyping inflation and ignoring the good news, the good economic news right after this. And welcome back. Mary in Sunrise Beach, Missouri. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine, Mary. What's up?
Well, I heard you were having Professor Wolff on, and
actually, now you sound very, very muffled. Are you sure you don't have your thumb over the microphone or something? It's hard to understand what you're saying.
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. So your question, Mary.
I would like you to ask Professor Wolff and yourself, since we're going to be talking about economics, my thinking on the tax issue, strictly taxes, just wipe the whole tax code out and just say, okay, everybody has to declare once a year what their wealth is. Forget about wages, forget about everything. It's just what is, the worth of your total assets, as if you had died.
Well, that's what Elizabeth Warren proposed, only it wouldn't kick in until your wealth was over $1 billion, I think.
Well, my thinking is, keep your first $10 million, even if, you know.
Sure.
Yeah. If you have $10 million worth of wealth, keep it. And anything over that, whatever it's worth, it might be, you know, $40 billion for all we know, but whatever that's worth, over $10 million, you pay 60% tax on it. Boom.
Yeah. You know, there have been countries, actually wealth taxes were a big thing in Europe for a while. They've largely gotten rid of them, you know, as neoliberalism crept around the globe. But I think you're onto something, Mary. I think you're onto it.
It's the only true way to even things out.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd go to the 60%, but I get your idea. Mary, I got to move along, and thank you for the call. It still sounded bad. Let me, just for people who are watching on TV, if you call on the phone, you know, and you talk like this, right, with the phone up to your head, and if you want to put me on speaker while you're on hold, I get that. If you do that, just put the microphone right up against your mouth, and you can still talk to me on speaker, but put it right up against your mouth, and I won't know the difference, right? As long as your mouth is talking into the microphone, it can be on speaker or not. Dave in Silicon, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Professor Wolff.
He's coming in an hour.
Professor Hartmann, yes, Professor Hartmann. Okay, you know, there's so much confusion out there about class, middle class, working class. You know, the scientific way to do this is by looking at the means of production. If you own the means of production, in other words, if you're the 1%, then you are a capitalist. If you are among the 99% or so, 90+%, if you have to work for a living, or if you're dependent on a salary, a wage, or what you call it, retirement, you are working class. And the middle class is actually a very small group, not to be confused with middle income bracket, but middle class are people that own the means of production and yet still have to work.
Yeah.
Like a dentist.
I'd put a finer point on it, Dave. I have never lived off of passive income in my life. And that's my definition of a capitalist. On the other hand, I've owned a bunch of businesses. That's my definition of an entrepreneur. But, you know, the money that came out of those was both my work and the people that worked for me. I suppose you could argue that that's capital. But anyway, Dave, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but, you know, you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention, I just wanted to bring this up, is this is making me crazy. This is about the media. Eric Boehlert is writing about this in his newsletter. I believe it's today. It might have been yesterday afternoon, but you know, one or the other. And basically that there is well, here's what he wrote. He said, NBC Nightly News did not, well, when the U.S. job reports was released for the month of October, showing a surging economy, adding 531,000 jobs. This is mind-boggling. This is better than anything Donald Trump ever did. As well as revising estimates for September and August, confirming an additional 235,000 job positions were created, What did NBC Nightly News lead with? What did ABC World News Tonight lead with? Neither network, he notes, considered 766,000 new jobs to be an important development. Contrast that, he writes, this is his press run newsletter, contrast that to last Wednesday when news broke that inflation had jumped 6.2% last month, fueling concerns about spiraling consumer costs. That evening, both NBC Nightly News and ABC World News Tonight slotted the inflation story as the second most important development in the entire news cycle. So Biden is putting the economy back together in many ways, significantly. We've increased food stamp benefits by 25% thanks to the Biden administration. We saw strong retail sales third month in a row in October. Those numbers just came out. Goldman Sachs says unemployment is going to continue to fall. I mean, yeah, we had, 6.2% inflation in October, but we're better off, generally speaking. Julian Coronado, president and founder of Macro Policy Perspectives, told the Washington Post, disposable income has been about 9.5% higher in 2021 than it was before the pandemic, even when you factor in inflation. So we're starting to get out of the red state minimum wage job trap, at least in the blue states and the purple states. But the media doesn't have a thing to say about this. I mean, they do the story about fossil fuel prices, right? Gasoline's $6 a gallon here at this weird little station in some weird part of California. $6 a gallon. Oh my God, can you believe it? Well, the price of oil is up $60 a barrel. And there's 42 gallons in a barrel. So that's, about $1.50 a gallon of gasoline. And surprise, surprise, the price of gasoline is up by about $1.50. Now, who raised that price? Was that Joe Biden? No, it was Saudi Arabia and Russia, by and large. It was OPEC. The countries that control most of the world's oil supply are cutting back on what they're shipping. Why? Well, I think it's fairly obvious why. They see that the entire world, look at COP26. The entire world is saying, we're going to get off fossil fuels. And so those countries whose principal store of wealth is fossil fuels are saying, holy crap, we better sell this stuff for as much as we can while we still can. So why does the American press make it out like this is some sort of failure of the Biden administration? And why aren't more people beyond just me and Laura Clausen over on Daily Kos calling this stuff out? It's incredible. Why is the media hyping inflation and ignoring all the really good economic news? And I would add to it, by the way, they're doing this is what's driving down Biden's approval numbers.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And then what do? They do stories about, well, in a generic matchup, people would rather have a Republican than a Democrat. Well, of course, after all this bad news that you've focused on. Our book today is Microtrends Squared by Mark Penn. The first chapter, The Building Blocks of Change Today, The Power of Microtrends. We live in a microtrends world. It's driven by granular, often opposite patterns of human behavior that seem small but punch above their size. We've identified these powerful patterns as microtrends, and the world is full of them. Together, they are the dots of a global impressionist painting that comes to life when you step back and look at it holistically. These forces have only become more impactful in recent years, and they've started to upend society. 10 years ago, when I first identified these patterns in change and microtrends, I saw a world of boundless opportunities. I was over-the-top optimistic about how microtrends would produce a new world of personalized products on our shelf, and how in Washington they would produce an even greater selection of fresh, first-rate political choices. Of course, that's not exactly what happened. Instead, the information age has given way to the disinformation age, in which fake information abounds. The nation founded on free speech is grappling with how to live with free speech in the era of the internet troll. The optimism around our economy faded with the unexpected crash of 2008, followed by a historically slow recovery over a decade. Only now is it recovering. Unparalleled consumer choice is leading not to the growth of more startups, but to the dominance of just a few internet companies, which are amassing more and more power on the basis of data gleaned from willing but unknowing consumers. And the older generations, who in their own youth, led a rebellion, have now dug in their heels against the politics and culture of today's new generations. What makes the microtrend such a powerful tool in this moment is that it can unpack and explain changes that we're seeing that otherwise make no sense. On the surface, for example, the middle class can seem to be shrinking, and this is alarming. But it is only by digging deeper and seeing that education is driving more people into the upper classes that we can come to understand these overall statistics at a more molecular level. Often, two diametrically opposed trends are occurring at the same time, which would be invisible in the averages, but which leap out when understood as the result of a cauldron of microtrends. Today in politics, for example, there is no overall ideological shift. Instead, one group of moderates became more conservative and another group became more liberal, causing society to become both more liberal and more conservative at the same time, essentially canceling each other out. This increased polarization then produces even more gridlock and confusion. We can see similar tugs and pulls throughout society. While one group seeks more technology, another one wants to sit in the Amtrak quiet car. Some can't sit through a 6-second commercial. Others spend hours and hours binge-watching TV. Some live in a world of globalization, while others yearn for a return to greater nationalism. To explain all this, we've borrowed from Newtonian physics. For every trend, there is a counter-trend. It's human nature in the information age. Every move or desire in one direction seems to inspire a counter-move by another group in the opposite direction. For every radical group, there's a new conservative group. For every new product in mobile technology, there are those sticking to the flip phone. Only by understanding the complexity of these developments can we make sense of a world that seems senseless, confused, and even jumbled. While in 2007, microtrends allowed you to navigate the changes of the day, now Microtrends Squared lets you better understand the emerging chaos as the seesawing of opposite forces fighting for dominance in the social, political, and cultural worlds. In the last decade, technology was able to exploit and even conquer the world of microtrends with its ability to customize products and our lives based on AI and big data. But even as these attempts have transformed our lifestyles, they've also led to some serious unintended consequences that have further clouded society. Microtrends disentangles many of these shifts and lies at the source of many battles for power that have disrupted our world today. As you'll see throughout this book, those ongoing battles will result in some very unlikely winners, losers, and shifts in the overall power match of society. While the technology behind increased personalization of goods and services has been providing us with more choice in our daily life, we've instead been making fewer choices, burrowing into comfortable silos. We expected that the advances in our ability to customize goods and services would open us all up to a new world of never-ending experimentation. A decade later, exactly the opposite has occurred, and our society has become increasingly polarized, with people finding choices they like and picking them over and over again. In 2007, Microtrends explained how the Starbucks economy had succeeded the Ford economy. In the Ford economy, you could have any color you wanted as long as it was black. The aim of industry was to mass-produce products at the lowest possible cost, and that meant standardization of goods. But the new economy of the 21st century was moving starkly away from that model, instead providing consumers with any color they wanted. The Starbucks economy was based on creating greater value through customization, even of simple products like coffee and tea. People everywhere became more individualistic in their tastes and were rebelling from carefully mowed lawns and white picket fences. The marketplace responded to these trends by allowing people to have it their own way, and they did. The theory was that more choice would result in a happier and more satisfied group of consumers. Variety would open consumers up to new experiences, in many ways bringing us closer together, allowing us to mix, match, and try out all sorts of new options. Something rather surprising happened, however, as consumers got more choice. The book Microtrends Squared. recommending that we do it in ways that leave us with massive trade surpluses, although that's what we had throughout most of the 18th and early 19th and early 20th centuries. But then you go over to Wikipedia, where apparently the neoliberals have rewritten the definitions. This is the mercantilism is an economic policy that is designed to maximize exports and minimize imports. It promotes monarchy, aristocracy, clericalism, militarism, imperialism, colonialism, tariffs and subsidies on traded goods to achieve that goal. Really? Really? So I would say, well, what's your definition of mercantilism, Kerry?
Well, I would go with your first definition personally, but I'm very rusty on my international economics, but I don't think it's changed all that much.
No, this goes back to David Ricardo. It's basically, that if your country, and you could do the same thing with household income, as much as I dislike those comparisons. If you have, $30,000 a year in income, you spend more than $30,000 a year, which is basically what we've been doing. We have a $700 billion trade deficit just with China. No, actually, that's with the world. If you spend more than that $30,000, you go into debt. If you spend less than $30,000, you accumulate a surplus. If your income every year is $30,000. Yeah, I think you could say the same thing about individual nations. Either you are in debt, you are static, or you are in surplus. And I'm arguing that we should be static, that we should not be buying more than we are selling. I'm sorry, Kerry, I interrupted you in mid-sentence.
No problem. I mean, my theory would be that we need to diversify our economy.
Yeah.
And you need heavy lifting jobs for certain people, and that would be manufacturing. So, but I do think the world is changing. A lot of this stuff is getting automated. So
of course.
I'm not sure how that plays out. And value of labor.
Well, it does here. Here's how it plays out. First of all, somebody has to make the machines that are the automation, right? The tool and die shop my dad worked at, most of what they made wasn't things that made finished parts. Most of what they made were parts for other machines that made things, mostly for General Motors and Fisher Body. So number one, automation does create jobs because somebody's got to make the automation, somebody's got to service the automation. You have to build factories to make the automation. Number two, the automation is increasing your productive capacity. It means that instead of making 1,000 screws an hour, you can make 10,000 screws an hour. Well, that means that your manufacturing is generating more wealth faster. It might do it with fewer people, and I acknowledge that. I'll put that right up front. Bringing manufacturing back to America is not going to bring back the tens of millions of jobs that have vanished, but it is going to bring back a significant fraction of them. My point is not so much about jobs, although that's real. It's about wealth. The only way a nation can build wealth is by manufacturing things.
But why isn't the know-how behind these things wealth?
Well, arguably it is, in as much as it can be translated into things that have lasting value. Back to Adam Smith's example. If you take a tree limb that, setting aside the value of nature, which is a whole other argument, but if you take a tree limb that, in terms of an American economy, has no value, and you apply a couple of hours of human labor to it with a jackknife, and you whittle it into an axe handle, you now have something you can sell for $5 for the next 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 years, right? It has value. So what you have done is you have increased the wealth of your entire country by $5 by making that axe handle, by applying labor to it. On the other hand, if we're loaning each other money at interest and somebody's keeping the interest, we're not making anything. We're not producing anything of value. We're just moving money around. If we're making hamburgers, it's essential to live, but we're not creating wealth. We're just, moving things around. And that's why I say manufacturing is the key to the whole thing.
Well, the real value at McDonald's is not the hamburgers. The real value is the real estate. So,
increasingly, which is a whole nother argument. Kerry, I got to move along, but thank you very much for the call. It's good to hear from you. Paul in Zillow, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, good morning, Tom. As a small American manufacturer, I appreciate your opening.
Thank you. You mind my asking what you make?
We make wine.
Very cool.
I believe you have some in your house.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you're right. I do. Yes. Remind me of the name of your vineyard.
Paradisos del Sol.
Paradisos del Sol. You're right, and I love your wines. They're great. And ordered them online. So
Yes,
you're kind of on the edge of is that manufacturing or not? Because if I'm hanging on to your wine for years and years, and it's increasing in value, then arguably that's a thing of value. If on the other hand you made it this year and I drank it this year, that's more like making hamburgers, isn't it, Paul?
Well, that's a good thing, except that McDonald's doesn't grow anything. Our wine starts with water, soil, and sunshine.
Ah,
so we
okay.
Grapes. We are starting with, when we bought this farm, there were no vineyards on it. We have developed the vineyards. In that process, we've increased the value of our property, so we are paying property taxes on a regular basis.
Right.
We then produce wine, and we don't, unlike McDonald's, which receives a truckload of food on the morning and ships food out all day, our wines take years. So we process the grapes, aging the wine before bottling between 1 and 3 years. Then we bottle it and age it longer. Every year I have inventory, I pay tax on that. So I'm actually paying wealth taxes regularly.
You're right. Property tax is a wealth tax. We all pay a wealth tax.
Yeah, every bottle of wine that leaves our farm has had an inventory tax for at least 2 years.
Wow. Wow.
So I view that as a wealth tax, and a lot of our wines don't leave for 5 years. So we're paying taxes 5 times on that wine.
Very cool.
And so that's one of the real challenges of how we can equitably tax wealth. I mean, most Americans, their biggest, and you've said this many times, their biggest substantial wealth is in their home, and they're paying wealth taxes on their home, property taxes.
Right.
And then the question is, how do we deal with these people who are who have become obscenely rich and are getting richer? Because one of the challenges for me the last couple of years is we've always tried to use only products made in America. So I've always intentionally bought bottles manufactured in Seattle, Washington, out of recycled glass. Mm-hmm. But something happened in 2016. Suddenly, all the wineries that had been buying Chinese glass were now finding American glass to be more price competitive. And now, as a little guy, it's almost impossible for me to get the bottles that I used to purchase. I've actually ended up having to bottle wine in Chinese bottles because currently we have a real wine bottle shortage problem in America.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So the bottom, Paul, I want to move along to the next caller. The bottom line point you wanted to make was
that we at least are paying a wealth tax on a very regular basis in our manufacturing process.
Okay. Apropos of the earlier caller who said we should just dump all the income taxes and go with the wealth tax. I get it. And Paul, Paradiso del Sol, your winery. I want to tip my hat to you guys. You make great wines. Thank you for the call.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Good talking to you. Ted in Washington, D.C. Hey, Ted, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was calling because you asked the question about why manufacturing is so bad in this country, and I think I have at least one part of the answer. And I think part of the problem comes from the way that we talk about manufacturing. A few years ago, you had a lot of people who were pushing the idea of young people going to college and getting a career as a programmer or whatever. And, they would say, well, if you go to college, you can get a really good career. And if you can't go to college, then you can always learn a trade and you can make a good salary. And the way it was expressed was it was sort of demeaning to anyone who would rather make something tangible, and have a career that way. It wasn't considered a career. And I think that's part of the problem is that we don't see people who actually make things or work with their hands in the same way that we see somebody sitting in front of a computer.
I agree with you, Ted, and I think that's an important point, but it builds on the foundation of what Reagan did to labor and what Reagan did to manufacturing, which was, when he came into office, a third of American jobs were unionized. Most of those are manufacturing jobs. By the time the Reagan-Bush administration was over, we were down to 10%. We're down to 6% in the private workforce. And as a consequence, manufacturing, if somebody's looking at going to college and ending up making, $60,000 a year as a lawyer or more, versus, taking a manufacturing job and making $20,000 or $30,000 a year at some fairly low wage because there's no union there, it's like, why bother? And go ahead.
Can I give you an example of how this works out? I'm a practicing jeweler. I've been a jeweler for the past 50 years, and I was looking at this job listing site. I think it was Indeed.com, and they had posted one job for an entry-level job working for Amazon in their warehouse, and they were going to pay $18 an hour. And in that same job site, they had a listing they were asking for a master jeweler, and they were willing to pay $25 an hour. Now, the way that I saw it is that, to become a jeweler at all, you have to, train for at least 3 or 4 years. And then for another 10 or 15 years, you'd have to have, that would give you the experience where you could sort of reach the level to be a master jeweler. So for all that time, instead of getting a job at a warehouse, I could work all that extra time and make another $7 an hour.
Which is not quite worth the effort. Is that your point, too?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, maybe you guys need a union. I don't know.
Well, that's the problem. See, we don't have a union. That's the problem.
Yeah, there you go.
Because the union helps to decide what a job is worth.
Yeah. So really, my op-ed today is entirely about what wealth is and how manufacturing affects it. But if we're going to raise incomes, we also need to unionize. Ted, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Great story. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back. And welcome back. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's up?
Good morning, Thomas. How are you?
I am well. How are you today?
I'm not in jail and I'm not in the hospital yet.
Yeah, still breathing, still talking. So what's on your mind, James?
Upright. Well, apparently, it's clear we have a financial economy, okay? And
heavily
therefore
financialized,
yeah. Yeah, and the people at the top are billionaires, and they're financial terrorists. They're psychotic. By nature of their investments, if nothing else, they have to be financial terrorists. Workers in this country are not middle class. A former caller was right. You're middle class soundly, and God bless you. Very productive as a middle class member. Working class, never been middle class in any country so far as I can tell.
Well,
the reason for my call.
I mean, that all depends on where you draw your lines and how you define those words. I mean,
Their investments bring death and destruction to bring them financial profit, and I don't know how else to explain it than psychosis.
Yeah, no, my point, though, slightly pushing back on what you're saying, James, is that during that period from the 1940s until the 1990s, really, the middle class and the working class had a huge overlap. And what has happened since the 1990s as a result of Reaganism and free trade in particular, and the deunionization of America, is that overlap between the middle class and the working class has decoupled, and increasingly the middle class has pulled away from the working class. I would go along with you on that. But what your point about financialization in the investor class, where are you going with that?
Well, something I wondered about was futures, because I was interested to note recently that apparently they were invented, whatever kind of fraud scheme they are, in 1975, and prior to that they didn't exist.
No.
I'm just wondering what kind of scheme this is.
Futures markets go back hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, the Dutch tulip mania back in the 1600s was in large part happening in a futures market. The futures markets came about by and large in the United States. They became a big thing, and the reason that they were traded on the Chicago Commodity Exchange back in the day was for farmers. If you were a farmer and you were planting let's say you're planting wheat this year, and you plant your crop and it's spring, and you need some money to live on between now and the fall, and so you think your crop is going to be worth, say, $100,000. If it's a really good year with great weather, your crop will be worth $110,000. If it's a really crappy year and it rains a lot, and you lose some of your crop's only going to be worth $90,000 at the end of the year. So what you do is you go out to Kellogg's and you say, hey, Kellogg's, I will sell you in advance my crop for $100,000, because that's what I think is probably the safe middle point. I'll sell it to you for $100,000. Kellogg's buys that. That's a future. They buy, it's an option to buy your wheat at a particular price. Now, Kellogg's then can turn around and say to, a competitor, say Post, if Post is still around, I don't know, who used to make grape nuts. They can say to Post, hey, we've got a future for, 100,000 barrels of wheat, and we probably won't use them, so we'll sell them to you. It's a $100,000 future. We'll sell it to you for $105,000. And so you get all this trading in futures. That's really where it all started, James. And it was to protect the farmers. So, by and large.
Fraudulent because it's American now. Fraudulent because it's USA.
Oh, it's been turned into a scam. I mean, probably half the activity on the futures market now has absolutely nothing to do with that kind of thing. Airlines, by the way, do the same thing with jet fuel. They buy jet fuel futures. But so much of it now is just speculation. You're right. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at ThomHartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmannReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com and at HartmannReport.com. There you go, 52 minutes past the hour. And Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Hey, one of the problems that Biden is having is the problem that all Democrats have, and that is our liberal biased media has a vicious right-wing swing to it.
You bet. So much for liberal media, yeah.
Yeah. When Bill Clinton was president and and we were having the tech boom, it was a true revolution. Republicans named it a bubble. The one thing that you'll know about bubbles do not come back and then lead the economies for the next couple of decades. That tech boom was a real tech revolution.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Now, the stock market did go up a little more than it should have as a result of that, but you're absolutely right.
Not.
You don't think so?
Actually not. What happened is Alan Greenspan was trying to get George W. Bush into the White House. So he took the Fed rate up to 6.5% for Bill Clinton while that tech boom was going. That destroyed the tech boom in America, but it didn't destroy it in China. China came in and picked up bargains in America, and they've been running ever since, running ahead of us ever since, not actually leading us, but gaining on us, and they may have left us, reached the point now where they're ahead of us. But it was what Alan Greenspan did to destroy Bill Clinton's economy, and then the news media just picked up on the talking points of the Republicans. It was, and they called it a bubble. And like I said, bubbles don't come back and lead the world in the economy for decades on end.
Right. It was tech is. I mean, look at the S&P. Tech is still driving the economy.
It's still doing it. And China never had a recession back then. We did.
Yeah.
And the only reason why we did is because the Republicans made it happen, which is something that they try to do every time a Democrat is in the White House.
Right.
When Obama was in the White House, they kept the Federal Reserve kept the Fed rate down to zero. Keeping it down to zero actually stifles the economy. And then just as, but also raising it also causes the stock market to go down. So just as Obama was ending his economy, his stay in the White House, just like Bill Clinton, the Fed started raising the interest rate.
Right.
And they did it to Obama, they did it to Carter, they did it to
Clinton,
to Bill Clinton. And then if you look at what happens whenever a Republican's in the White House, the Fed rate always goes down in those last years.
Right. And they're talking about now raising it just in time for the 2022 election again.
Right. And they did it for the 1994 election also. That's what Alan Greenspan did then. They do this every time the recession, the election time comes along, because they're trying to get Republicans in the White House. And then the news media just picks up on the right-wing talking point. And so they right now, they're not talking about the fact that, oh my, what happened to all those long lines, food lines that were occurring a year ago when we were in Trump time? They're not comparing Biden with Trump time. But in Trump time, a year ago, the lines went on for miles. People didn't have enough food to eat. Biden took care of that. That's gone now.
Yeah.
I looked at the internet just this morning, and I couldn't find a single story about food lines.
You're right. You're right. And those stories have just largely vanished. I mean, you know, we've got some new problems.
So what's the big story now is inflation. But if inflation is hurting Americans so badly, you would see them in those food lines, because we would be running out of food. We're not running out of food, so inflation is not really hurting the American people bad right now.
Yeah, and
like it did a year ago.
Yeah, and I do think it's going to be a temporary thing. I mean, you know, there will be a lasting impact from it, but I think it's a temporary thing.
But if you listen to right-wing TV and right-wing radio, all they're talking about right now is inflation and how it's killing Americans.
Yeah.
And they're also claiming that the dollar has lost value, when in fact it's gained value.
Yeah, you're right. They're trying to jawbone down the economy, basically. I looked at the writing.com this morning, RIGHTING, and you're absolutely right, Larry. Not all, but many of the headlines on the right-wing sites are all about, Biden's destroying the economy. Right. Larry, I always learn something from you. Thank you, Larry. Thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Stick around. Richard Wolff, Dr. Richard Wolff is up next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is in Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. "It's too weird here," she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, "Madam President." We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. "Did y'all sleep here?" a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump triumphs," and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is our old friend, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books. His most recent, which is also now available as an ebook, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. democracyatwork.info, rdwolff with 2fs.com, his websites. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, PROFWOLFF. Professor Wolff, welcome back. I spent the first hour ranting about the importance of manufacturing as a way of creating wealth and pointing out that basically moving money around generally does not create wealth. It just, it's just moving money around, it's transferring it from one class to another. I'm wondering if you could define what financialization is. There's a lot of talk about how the American economy, as we've deindustrialized over the past 40 years with this neoliberal free trade policy, as manufacturing has gone down, financialization has gone up. What does that mean?
Well, basically, the reality is that the financial sector, the part of our economy that, as you rightly put it, moves money around, has now successfully inserted itself literally into every pore of the economy that we live in. Governments cannot do anything anymore without turning to the bankers, the insurance companies, and the others from whom they must borrow trillions of dollars in order to function, even in a most basic way. Corporations, which used to be business entities that bought inputs, hired workers, and produced outputs, now have to spend huge amounts of time, energy, percentages of their personnel dealing with moving money around. Corporations, for example, are in debt on a scale we've never seen in the history of the United States, or indeed of any capitalism. Every transaction corporations make has to be undertaken with an eye to the banker. Can they borrow to cover this transaction? Will they be able to get enough cash flow to service the debts that they've accumulated? And finally, households. This is in some ways the most remarkable thing of the last 30 to 40 years, that people who used to earn money working would then go out and spend the money in the grocery store or the department store or the hardware store. Now they're half of the time borrowing the money. Even if they go into a little corner store to get a bottled water, they will use a credit card, for example, which is a loan. It's the way it works is that the bank literally lends you the money to buy that bottle of water, but instead of giving you the money to hand over to the merchant, the bank directly credits the merchant with the money and debits your account. It means that the bank is in your face, in your business, literally all day, every day. And the result is that the bankers, having become the big middlemen, we used to call them, are taking a cut out of everything. Every transaction gives the financial folks a commission, an interest rate, a share, a say in what's going on, and they used it to become the big growth sector. So all the people who don't have jobs in manufacturing, if they're lucky, get a job working somewhere in the insurance business, which is a kind of financial business. It simply gives us some promise of money, in exchange for our paying them premiums. It's just a money-moving operation. And so we now have a capitalism in which everything is mediated by debt. Everything is interspersed with a debt someone has to someone else. And here's one important consequence for people to take seriously. We're in a kind of new world. If suddenly, for example, over the last 18 months, we have a pandemic which our system can't handle, and that's what we had, suddenly large numbers of people had no job, businesses couldn't function, and that would be bad enough. But that meant all these people and all these businesses could not service their debts. They couldn't pay the interest. They couldn't pay back the principal that they owned. And that put all kinds of institutions not immediately affected by the pandemic into a terrible situation, because this network of debt links everybody to everybody else. And so it makes our system much more vulnerable to instability than it already was.
So how did we get into this? And assuming that it's not a good thing for our economy, how do we get out of it?
Well, the way we got into it is the way a capitalist economy gets into anything. Somebody somewhere has a profit motive. As we know, the dominant rule of our business is you set up a business, you get into a business, you expand the business if and so far as it's profitable. So I'll give you one example. Banks used to be mostly about lending money to businesses. Then one of them said, wait a minute, maybe we can figure out a way to make money not only by lending to businesses, but let's see if we can lend to the average man and woman, adult in this country. And that was a decision. Before the 1970s, there wasn't much in the way of consumer lending other than for the mortgage for your home. And before the 1930s, we didn't have much of that either. But after the 70s, we really went to town, led by institutions like Citibank and Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and so on, to hook the average person into debt, into financialization. And this was done by making the automobile something you could afford with a loan that you had to pay off, by giving you a credit card. Before the 70s, only a few business people had that American Express card. But afterwards, the average American has got a wallet full of these credit cards. Every one of them is linking that person to a bank and therefore to the financialization. And then the biggest one of all of the last 30 years was hooking an entire generation of college students, so they are now carriers of debt, worried sick that they won't be able to earn the money to pay it back, to keep their credit rating. The credit rating holds us all hostage. We are all working for the financial sector directly or indirectly. That's a process of profit-driven banking that led the way in doing all of that. And I'm afraid that the only answer to your question, how do we get out of it, is this is now so core a part of our economic system that nothing less than changing the system is going to get us out of it. And I'm afraid that we are going to be seeing more and more instability as people realize that this network, this cobweb of debt linking us to one another, means that if any part of this system gets in trouble, we're all going to be dragged down with it, because we're all hooked into one another through this network of debt. And you can see it happening as the government now, to back up a system in trouble, has to pump trillions and trillions of dollars into the financial sector, because that's where the money initially goes, in order to keep this game going. I'm very, very fearful that the economic downturns, the one we had in 2000, so-called .com, the one we had in 2008, so-called subprime mortgage, and the one we're still in now, the so-called COVID, each of them worse than the one before, are showing us that financialization goes together with an even greater danger of the instability built into our system than we already had.
So I remember back in the 70s or 80s, I think it was, in fact, I think it was in the 80s, when General Motors got into the lending business. They created GMAC, you know, basically a lending branch, figured, hey, you know, the banks are making money, loaning people money to buy cars. Why don't we get in on this? Back then, by the way, you could deduct the interest on your car loans. Reagan did away with that in one of his 18 tax increases on working people. General Electric famously had, you know, a finance division. I think both of those got bailed out heavily by both Bush and Obama during the 2008 crash. I read someplace, this was a year or so ago, that Apple actually made more money in one particular recent year with financial instruments and moving money around and debt and tax avoidance than they did selling products. Now, I can't say that that's for sure true, but, you know, they sure made a hell of a lot of money. And this is increasingly happening. These are things that not only were not common practices prior to the neoliberal era, prior to Reaganism by and large, and the changes in the banking laws in the 70s that allowed the credit card companies to explode, but were actually illegal in many regards. Is, you know, rather short of bringing down the entire capitalist system, which, you know, I think you and I both agree is probably unlikely to happen, at least in this decade. Can we at least re-regulate some of this stuff? By the way, we have about a minute and a half before we're going to hit a hard break.
Sure, we could. Hypothetically, we could limit it. But it doesn't look like we have the political muscle compared to this financialized sector to do that. A couple of comments. You can go back to William Shakespeare and before that. Remember the famous Shakespeare line, neither a borrower nor a lender be.
Sure.
Shakespeare understood that when you get into that on either end, you get hooked by the very process that feeds on itself and makes the situation more and more dangerous. We're living out the wisdom of what William Shakespeare wanted to say. You are right about General Motors. If you go back to those years, you can see, and General Motors knew this, that they were making more profit lending to the people who bought their cars than they were making on the cars. In fact, they lowered the prices of their cars in part to hook people in to buying them at the attractive price and then borrowing from General Motors to pay for it, not understanding that the interest General Motors got made that car more expensive than the original price was. I don't think we can break out of this until we confront the system, because the people who run the finance are pretty close to running the system as well.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, rdwolff, Prof Wolff on Twitter, rdwolff.com as well. Professor, thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. Want to get into a discussion about the January 6th coup attempt, too, right after the break. Stick around. And welcome back. David in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, David, thanks for listening to our Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for all you do. I just wanted to repeat what you were talking about yesterday, that I guess it was in the Build Back Better plan that they had an amendment to give people a tax break for buying American-made cars, and that Senator Manchin wanted to block that. I would hope that the progressives stand up for it, and maybe also try to get rid of some of the right to work for less laws.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that.
I am absolutely with you. This is this is something we need to be paying a lot of attention to. You know, David very well said. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Good to hear from you. Justin in Lincoln, Nebraska, listening or watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Justin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. What's on my mind is mainly health care, workman's comp and health care. I mean, I think if we had universal health care in this country, it'd be harder for a lot of these corporations, a lot of these factories to let people go. I mean, it is so easy. I've seen it 1,000 times. I've worked a lot of different places here in Nebraska. But, somebody gets hurt, and then people just kind of start to give them the cold shoulder, isolate them. It's like, oh, this guy is going to probably try to sue the company or something, or this guy needs money, he's got some health issues, and it's not like he's not going to get healed or something. It's not like, like if he goes to the doctor and then, he can come back to work in a couple months, they don't even want you there. They don't want you there. That's
Not only do we not have paid sick leave, we don't have unpaid sick leave either.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, if we had universal health care, I think that would solve a lot of problems. And look, I'm not a greedy guy. I worked at a factory over here. They produce a lot of plastic stuff, and I worked there for a little while. But they had me running one machine. I was like, oh, hey, I could do that for like $10 an hour. I was younger at the time, and it was like no big deal, right? Well, then they started to say, hey, can you run 2 machines? Hey, can you run 3 machines at the same time? Like, I guess, But then they started messing with the dial on the machine, and somebody, it was the supervisor, the parts started to melt because he wanted it to go too fast. So I guess they want the numbers, but they don't want to pay for it, when they're producing stuff. Yeah. But also, I wanted to say, I don't understand why everybody's so afraid of the Chinese government. I get it; they have a granary or a seed place out here. They have a meat packing plant here. They bought a lot of our agriculture stuff. I just think that, if they were so worried about it, they would stop doing business with them, or they would choose to do business elsewhere. But anyways, hey,
well,
thank you
China
for taking my
is
call.
rapidly diversifying out of that. I mean, they continue to own a lot of American companies and a lot of American agricultural properties, but they are buying like there's no tomorrow across Africa, across northern India, other parts of arguably Asia. They're buying parts of Europe. I mean, the Chinese are diversifying. They are getting ready to be the next great world power. And I think within the next 5 years, we're going to have to acknowledge that they have surpassed the United States. And the fact that they're not a democracy makes that, in my mind, very problematic. Justin, thank you for the call. Not to say that we should go to war with them or anything like that. That would be the worst possible outcome. But get ready for a rough ride. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We can continue this conversation about financialization and mercantilism and manufacturing and neoliberalism and all that stuff in just a minute. But I wanted to also point out, as Congress is preparing to debate whether or not to basically kick Paul Gosar out like they did Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is technically a member of Congress, but she has no responsibilities. She has a vote, and that's it. And the same thing, you know, in my opinion, hopefully will happen to Gosar today, where he will lose his committee assignments and things like that. But I want to take it even a step beyond that. Jonathan Karl's got a new book out, and there's a little gem of data in that book that we didn't know before, that I think is really worth focusing on and paying some serious attention to. And I'm guessing because this is kind of the kind of thing that, you know, doesn't involve a person or a scandal or a, it doesn't bleed, so it won't lead. It probably won't get much coverage in the American press, but I wanted to point it out to you. When the Capitol was attacked on January 6th, an attack that our media is increasingly calling a riot or even an insurrection. And those words have very specific meanings. They have broad meanings as well, but they have very specific meanings, which don't involve overthrowing a government and don't involve treason. As we're hearing this and we're hearing the media characterize these things this way, Jonathan Karl's book points out that the one office that was most severely damaged during that January 6th attack on our democracy was the parliamentarian's office. Now, why would a bunch of yahoos who are simply protesting because they think Trump won show up and rip the parliamentarian's office apart? Well, it turns out that's where the Electoral College ballots were supposed to be held. One of the employees in the parliamentarian's office took those ballots with her and hid them someplace else. But the majority of these people, or not the majority, but a large number of these people knew exactly where to look. They knew exactly what they were looking for. This is a coup attempt. This was an attempt to overthrow the government of the United States with violence. We need to stop calling this a riot. We need to stop calling it an insurrection. This was an attempted coup. And what do you call attempted coups? Rehearsals. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your calls right after the break. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword, at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified. We have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home, a temple to the new India, or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. When I was a kid, back in the day, when I was 14, actually, I got a job, had to get a work permit, in fact, to get this job at Henry's Hamburgers in Lansing, Michigan, just down the street from McDonald's, flipping burgers for, as I recall, $2.15 an hour, whatever the minimum wage was. And back then, you know, we understood that minimum wage jobs were largely for teenagers after school to earn a little extra money. It wasn't always the case. It depended on where you lived in the country and who you were, but by and large, That's no longer the reality, although that is the Republicans' story that they tell themselves. The reality now is that the average age is 35 years old, that 90% of minimum wage workers are not teens, that 59% are women, 28% have children, more than half, 54% work full-time, and that essential and frontline workers are overrepresented among the minimum wage workers. Got a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out about the minimum wage. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls. Dave in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, I like that article, but I'd like to suggest an addendum. You're correct that foreign investors buy companies in real estate, but I think what's more impactful is when they trade with the U.S., they trade in dollars, and they only convert back to their currency enough money to pay their workers. The rest goes right to Wall Street, which is used to buy treasuries. In fact, although it's not a reliable gauge all the time, when the U.S. trade deficit and the budget deficit are both high in tandem, like it is now, the stock market tends to do well because of the foreign investors buying treasuries. And also, their buying treasuries is a financialization process because it not only keeps interest rates low, but it also keeps the dollar stronger to their currency. So in essence, the financialization process is also hurting the trading partners. In other words, that's money that, if it didn't go to Wall Street, could be circulating in the manufacturing country.
Yeah, it's called the productive economy.
Right, and also, in essence, it's class warfare on the world. I mean, not just U.S. workers, but also the workers for our trading partners.
Yeah. Well, okay, you've thrown a lot of stuff in there, and some of it doesn't fit together like, good puzzle pieces in my brain. But, let me ponder it, Dave. I don't see where, the trade deficit and the budget deficit, the budget deficit is going to increase the availability of treasuries.
So it causes increased purchases. They park the money in treasuries.
Well,
you can also park in stocks, too, in real estate, as you suggest.
Yeah, I would say that the main downside of having foreign governments own basically 1/7 of all of America right now, the main downside of that is that when that part of America that they own produces surpluses, produces profits, take Smithfield Foods, the Chinese-owned company that makes a lot of pork in the United States, that when that company makes a profit, that profit doesn't stay in the United States. It goes to where its owners are, which is in China. And this isn't just to pick on China. I mean, you could say the same thing about Volkswagen making cars in Tennessee. Well, yeah, Wall Street absolutely takes a piece out of this, and Professor Wolff was spot on about that. But
they don't convert all the profits back to renminbi or yuan.
But this is reverse colonialism, essentially. What we used to own the companies, back when we would refer to Honduras as a banana republic. Well, who owned those banana trees, those banana plantations? Dole, right? An American company. So where did the profit go from the sale of them? Yeah, some money stayed in Honduras or some money stayed in Hawaii with pineapples, but most of before Hawaii was a state, but most of the profit came back into the United States because we owned those foreign companies. Now the tables are turned. Foreign entities, foreign governments, foreign investors, foreign individuals, foreign countries, or companies rather, own productive capacity in the United States. So when Toyota is made in Kentucky, where does the profit go from those cars? It goes back to Japan. When Smithfield Foods owns a giant farm in Kansas, where does the profit from that go? It goes back to China. When the UK owns, whatever it may be. I mean, a UK brand.
It's more complicated than that. Ford and Toyota both have the same mix of foreign and U.S. auto parts in their manufacture.
Yeah, and you're right. It does get very complicated, but anyhow, Dave, thank you. It's a fascinating conversation. Rick in Sacramento. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Hey there. Did I take my speaker off?
You are just fine.
Okay. I want to comment on nobody's talking about the pro-business bill that the Democrats are trying to push, and the Republicans are fighting.
You're talking about the Build Back Better bill.
The BBB is pro-business. The $300 child tax credit is going to go to businesses. They're not buying Bitcoin with it.
Yep.
The free community college helps businesses get qualified workers.
Yep.
Same with the preschool.
Yep.
Puts people on a path to be productive.
Yep.
The child care and the home health care subsidies allow people to go to work for businesses.
That's right.
And
Or because somebody else can care for a member of their family, so now they're available to be part of the productive workforce.
Right. And so, the people that do that don't have the skills for a high-skilled job. Whereas
but now they have jobs too, by the way.
Right. But I mean, what I'm saying is the woman who stays home that's a paralegal because she's got to take care of her kids and her parents, you could bring somebody in that's a less productive member of society.
Yeah, no, I get your point. If I'm staying home taking care of mom all the time, and there are other things that I could do that would be much more productive for society and frankly would make more money for me, if I can bring in somebody to care for mom, then I can go do that, or care for little Ralph or whatever it may be. No, your points are really well made. So Rick, is it not obvious to you that the only reason Republicans are opposed to Build Back Better, the only reason why the Republican Party is trying to purge, 13 Republicans who voted for the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill? And by the way, it makes me crazy that they keep saying bipartisan, because it was only marginally bipartisan, and that gives way too much credit to Republicans. But that's another rant. But in any case, isn't it obvious to you that the reason why Republicans are opposed to all this is because it simply helps America at a time when America is headed up by a Democrat?
It's party first, America second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And they call their movement America First, and it's a crock.
The same thing with the TARP plan in 2008 when they made a portion of it be tax cuts. Yep. On the cash for clunkers. They didn't make the Democrats wanted it to be only American-made cars. The Republicans wouldn't stand for that.
Yep.
They have always been spiting, or they're cutting off America's nose to spite the Democrats.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Anything they can do to harm the Democrats, even if it hurts America, is just fine with the Republicans. And it's been that way basically since 1981 when Ronald Reagan became president and changed the rules, not just of our economy, not just of our trade, not just of our labor laws, but basically changed the rules of politics themselves. And the Republican Party became an anti-democracy insurgency rather than a loyal opposition party that was loyal to this country. I'm with you. Rick, well said. Thank you. Michael in Los Angeles. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to play devil's advocate for just a quick second here on something you said earlier, just to see if I can get your thoughts on it. Because your theory on why why like the Russians or OPEC or whoever else the case may be are charging more per barrel, which is driving up the cost of gas, which is pretty much and they're putting all of this on Joe Biden, saying, oh, it's Joe Biden who is doing this. Well, first of all, one of the things that you said was that they're doing this because they're seeing all of these climate summits all over the world, and all these countries are deciding that we're going to, depend on.
That is pure speculation on my part, Michael. I'll put that right in front. But anyhow, keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was just saying that, we've been doing that for years. We've been having these summits for years saying we're going to get off fossil fuels, and it doesn't seem like it's changed much of their tune. But also, too... Well,
actually, if I may push back on that point.
Sure, sure.
There is a huge movement to divest out of fossil fuels, and it's starting to actually hurt the industry. And Biden's Build Back Better bill, and even the BIF, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, if you can call it bipartisan, are moving America in the direction of using fewer fossil fuels. And so, if you're in the fossil fuel business, get while the getting is good, Michael.
I can understand that. I can understand that. But another quick thing, you're saying that we should manufacture things here in the United States, which I completely agree with. But what about fossil fuels? Now, I applied Biden for doing things that are kind of helping us fight climate change by stopping a lot of the drilling and the pipelines and things like that. But one of the arguments on the right is that because Biden shut down some of these pipelines, which I'm not too sure if they would have helped drive down our cost of oil or our dependence on fossil fuels or not, But because he did that, and because he helped champion the building of a pipeline in Russia, is what they're saying, it's driving up the cost of oil because it's driving up our costs, our dependency on foreign oil. So what you say to that, or what's your opinion on that?
It's nonsense.
Okay.
I mean, stopping Enbridge 5 or 3 or whichever it was is such a tiny drop in the bucket. I mean, no. No, I thought you were going someplace, completely different with that. That's not it. I mean, if you were a heroin dealer and you were selling, heroin for $10 a bag, $10 a dose in your local neighborhood, and some smart guy came along and said, hey, a cartel from Colombia is moving into the neighborhood starting next Thursday, and they're going to be selling heroin for $3 a bag. Might you not be tempted between now and Thursday to raise the price to squeeze as much money as you can out of the people who still desperately need it? I mean, I think that's what's going on with oil. I mean, it's just we are literally addicted to fossil fuels, and we're trying to get off that addiction right now. We're taking steps to get off that addiction. And by the way, the gas pipeline to Europe just got canceled, or just got stopped, blocked temporarily. I really should get a guest on about that because I have not done a deep dive into the whole thing, but there's something going on there of consequence. But no, I don't think that our domestic policies. I mean, we're producing more oil and gas and coal. Well, I don't know if we're producing more coal, but we're producing more fossil fuels in the United States than we ever have before. And it was during the Obama administration that we reached the point where we were capable of producing 100% of what we need. Now, we changed the law during that time so we could export refinery products. So,
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And that was mostly to benefit the billionaires who own the refineries down on the Gulf Coast, so they could export things. But I don't think this is an issue. Michael, thank you for the call. And welcome back. Tom in Seattle. Hey, Tom, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to defend capitalism a little bit. It's a very effective system. It's the crony capitalism we're practicing now. If we practice it like we did in the 50s under Eisenhower, I think it's a very good system.
Well, it still had a lot of bugs in the 50s in the United States, but I would say that if you heavily regulate capitalism and you build a social safety net or a social floor into it, like Norway has done, like Sweden has done, like Denmark has done, to a lesser extent, like Germany, France, Spain, Italy have done, then it becomes less brutal. And yet continues to be, an engine that can drive, not just growth and productivity, because those are not necessarily goods in and of themselves, but innovation and, improvements in the quality of life. I am not an anti-capitalist. I am in favor of heavily regulated capitalism, which we have, frankly, in my opinion, never practiced in the United States.
Yeah, well, you use Sweden as an example. When the banks in Sweden were having their problems, they came to the government and they wanted a bailout. Well, the Swedish government said, tough, you're not going to get it.
Oh, look at Iceland. When the Icelandic banks were in trouble in 2008, they put 3 bankers in prison. They not only didn't bail them out, they threw their asses in jail.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yeah, sure. Go for it, Tom.
Well, we'd better start reminding people that they're trying to make Biden out as incompetent, but look what he's got done. And he didn't have the majorities that LBJ and FDR had.
Yeah.
And as far as pulling out of Afghanistan, well, it wasn't very pretty the way they pulled out of Vietnam, and it wasn't very pretty the way President Reagan pulled out of Beirut after 240-some Marines were killed.
Yep.
It's easy to say we could have done it better, but experience doesn't tell us that. It's a hard thing to do.
Well, and beyond that, America still does not acknowledge the fact that we declared war on a country that represented absolutely no threat to us, but did sit on the second largest reserve of oil and the cheapest oil in the world, and that was Iraq. And Dick Cheney pointed that out. You know, second largest stores of oil reserves, 10% of the world's oil reserves in Iraq. Number one, we declared war on them. Number two, that war was over in less than a month. We took the country, we took down their government, we killed their leader, we took control of their economy. That was the end of the war. What then started was a 20-year occupation of a foreign country. And until America figures out that we didn't lose the war, we won the damn war. We lost the occupation, and you will always lose an occupation. You can't occupy foreign countries. People don't want to be occupied any more than if Mexico tried to occupy us. You know, we would be fighting them. If Canada, you know, I love the Canadian government. I would love America to be more like Canada. But if Justin Trudeau marched troops into the United States and said, we're going to occupy the United States, I'd be at the front of the line fighting back. And, you know, and nobody acknowledges this. And that should be the big lesson, so that we don't make this stupid mistake. And we did it with both Afghanistan and Iraq. And frankly, I think we did it with Vietnam as well, or at least the southern part of Vietnam. That we've got to stop making these mistakes. Tom, thank you. Thank you for the call. 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So Sweden had this epidemiologist guy, not a physician, who was in charge for a while of their response to COVID. They put together a commission to look into, you know, what screwed up so badly. Why did so many Swedes die? In Brazil, they got the second worst rate of COVID infection and deaths in the world, behind us. And their Senate put together a 1,000-plus page report, basically saying that President Jair Bolsonaro should be tried for mass murder and crimes against humanity. Here in the United States, we've got this massive death toll, the worst in the world, certainly one of the worst in the developed world anyway. And we're doing basically nothing about it. We're not looking into it. Can you imagine if when Barack Obama was president, 700,000 Americans died? I mean, keep in mind, 4 Americans died at Benghazi, dozens of congressional hearings, 11 hours of testimony from Hillary Clinton. We've got a video about all this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Christian in Glen Allen, Virginia. Hey, Christian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you today? Can you hear me okay? I'm in the car. I want to make sure my connection.
I'm fine. Yeah. You're doing good. You're doing great,
glad
Christian.
to hear that.
Thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. What's up?
Look, I've been driving around Glen Allen quite a bit. I filled up my gas tank just, a few minutes ago, and I started looking at the gas prices around me. I noticed, son of a gun, gas prices seem to have dropped around me by about 15 cents. Regular gallon of gas, I should say, is now topping out at around maybe $3.15, $3.16 around me, when in fact maybe 2 weeks ago it was about.
Christian, I just lost you.
No, I apologize.
I'm
sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm back. I apologize. I'm sorry.
So the price dropped and the price went up and then it dropped again.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this inflation stuff that we're hearing right now is a bit of a hype. I mean,
it is.
I'm not going to compare ourselves to Europe, because Europe is Europe and they have their different lifestyles and everything else. But I've traveled a bit. I've been around the world. Gallon of gas in Europe, maybe $7-8 a gallon. I mean, this inflation thing seems
like
to be a bit of a hype. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right.
Am I wrong?
You're absolutely right. There is temporary inflation happening right now. There is some inflation that is happening as a consequence of all the money that we threw at the recession last year, just to try to keep people afloat, because it created more demand, and that demand right now is exceeding supply, which is in part why you've got, ships backed up at the port of Los Angeles. Part of that also is the fact that China has gone with a zero COVID policy. There is no COVID anywhere in China. They are not tolerating it. They're not putting up with it. There's none. And so Shanghai and a couple of other major ports had a few cases of COVID appear. This was like 3-4 months ago. It made big news. And they shut down those ports for 5 and 6 weeks while they quarantined everybody because their policy is no COVID. And so, that added to the supply shortage. And again, the price of goods is a function of supply and demand. When supply goes down and demand remains strong, or demand even goes up, as it has done, then you see an increase in prices. The other thing that's fueling this, Christian, is that during the pandemic, people who still had an income stopped buying services. We stopped going to restaurants. We stopped going to the theater. We stopped going to movies. But we still had that disposable income. So what did we do with that disposable income? How did we spend, the extra $50 a month that we've got that we would have used to go to the restaurant? We bought goods. We bought stuff. We went online. We bought stuff from Amazon. We bought stuff on individual websites. So what we have seen now over the past 18 months is a slight shift. It's only 2 or 3% or maybe 4%, but it's still enough to turn an economy or a tip an economy. We've seen a shift from service spending to goods spending at the same time that the supply of goods has been impacted by COVID coming out of China because, look in any store, 90% of what you see is made in China. And so all of these things have come together as kind of a perfect storm right now, and they are driving up prices. And the Republicans are running around with their hair on fire, and so is some of the media, and I think it's stupid.
I think it is, too. I appreciate your insight on this because, look, I don't want to pretend that I have a great income or a bad income. I'm comfortable. I'm fine. And a 5-cent shift in gas prices is not going to break me or make me one way or the other.
Yeah.
It's good to hear a perspective that makes a lot more sense. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Christian. Good to hear from you. And I would add, by the way, Louise and I back 5 years ago, I think, bought a Toyota Prius hybrid plug-in. So we plug it in the garage every night. It charges overnight. It runs 30 miles on a charge. And I bought 1 gallon of gasoline in the last year. 1 tank of gasoline in the last year. And, I'm paying for electricity, the equivalent. We did the math on this a while back, and it's costing me, I think, about $1.50 a gallon equivalent for electricity. So I'm saving a fortune. So if you're concerned, not you, Christian specifically, but if anybody is concerned about the cost of gasoline and it going up, and it going up even more in the future, if you've got a car with a few miles on it and it's getting to be time to trade it in or turn it in or junk it and buy something new, get an electric car. I'm telling you, it is coming. We'll be right back as we continue with our program. There's a lot more to talk about. I want to get into this whole insurrection and banning books thing.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.
say fight back!
book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. There's a bunch of stuff that I want to get to here, reaching all the way back to 1933 and what the House Republicans are doing right now. But I want to start with banning books. This is an amazing piece. Media Matters for America, MediaMatters.org is their website. They do some just absolutely incredible research. And one of the real leading organizations, it appears, based on what I'm seeing over on their website, in favor of banning books in our schools is this group called Moms for Liberty. And let me just share some pieces of this. This is Olivia Little writing for MediaMatters.org. The headline over at MediaMatters.org, banning books about Martin Luther King Jr. and opposing school district desegregation efforts inside Moms for Liberty's deep ties to the anti-civil rights movement. So this group has, in recent days, apparently removed some of their past from their website. And I think this is like consequential stuff, stuff we should be paying attention to. There was a June article in the far-right Epoch Times reporting that the Descovich is the co-founder of Moms for Liberty, Tina Descovich. Quote, Descovich believes that CRT, critical race theory, is divisive, denies the value of an individual based on the content of their character and their actions. The group's official social media page, according to Media Matters, included hashtag StopCRT as recently as October 14th. So a month ago, they were taking these positions. As of June 13th, they had a page up on their website titled Help Moms for Liberty Stop Critical Race Theory. They have since deleted that page. They even tried to solicit donations based on this. Donate here to help us fight critical race theory. That is gone. They have chapters around the country. They're broken down by counties. In Williamson County, Tennessee, the chapter hosted CRT 101, Critical Race Theory 101, inviting speakers to repudiate critical race theory. Robin Steenman, I'm reading now from Media Matters for America, head of the Williamson County Moms for Liberty chapter, vocally opposes critical race theory, saying critical race theory, this is a quote, critical race theory claims to solve racial discrimination by promoting racial discrimination. She continues that it is destructive and divisive. Now, this is the same county chapter that had a list of books of concern that included Martin Luther King Jr. and the March to Washington because of, quote, photographs of political violence. And another book, Ruby Bridges Goes to School. Ruby Bridges, you'll recall, was a young woman back in the day. She's still alive, I believe. She's in her 90s now, maybe younger than that. Who was, the first young black child to integrate a school. Ruby Bridges Goes to School, and they want to ban that book because of racist remarks in it, of course made by white people. The group also disapproved of First Nations of North America, Plains Indians, because it, quote, paints white people in a negative light. We're not supposed to acknowledge our history? Apparently not. And here's where it gets even weirder. Nationally, again, this is from this Media Matters piece. Nationally, Moms for Liberty recommends a book called The Making of America by W. Cleon Skousen. They say this is a helpful text when discussing the founding documents of the United States. So what's in this book that Moms for Liberty is apparently recommending? Well, he makes the argument that, quote, slavery is not a racial problem. In the history of the world, nearly every nation has had slaves. The Chinese kept thousands of slaves. Babylon boasted of slaves from a dozen different countries. The dark-skinned Hittites, Phoenicians, and Egyptians had white slaves. The Moors had black slaves. America had black slaves. The Nazis had white slaves. The Soviets still do, with several million white slaves wearing out their starved, near-naked bodies in slave labor camps. So the emancipation of human beings from slavery is an ongoing struggle. Slavery is not a racial problem. It is a human problem. Well, it is a human problem. But in the United States, as a result of laws passed in Virginia in the period from the 1630s right up through the end of the 17th century, slavery and race became essentially the same thing. And this is the history book that Moms for Liberty likes. Skousen, this is also from the book, calling slave owners, people who enslaved other human beings, quote, the worst victims of slavery, writing, quote, in some ways the economic system of slavery chained the slave owners almost as much as the slaves. Really? You force somebody to work at free labor and you are in bondage? Skousen, the author of this book that Moms for Liberty is promoting, was a supporter of the John Birch Society that claimed, quote, African-American freedom movement is being manipulated from Moscow with the goal of creating a Soviet Negro Republic in the southern United States, end quote. The author of this book also has claimed that there is a global cabal of bankers control the world from behind the scenes, and communists are taking over local PTAs. He also believed, quote, the civil rights movement, acceptance of homosexuality, the rise of abstract art and modernism, and the advent of Medicare, Social Security, and other social safety net programs have all been part of a clandestine plot waged by communists or other dark forces to destroy the United States. Thanks a lot, Moms for Liberty. You wonder where this stuff is coming from? It's always been here. We've always had crazies in this country and racists in this country promoting this kind of stuff. I think the larger issue is, why are we ignoring that? Why do we want to ignore our past? I'll tell you a country that is not ignoring its past right now, Germany. I was reading, during the break, I was reading the New York Times from March 20th, 1933. It just happened. It was sitting in the back room. I went back to grab a cup of coffee, and there it was. New York Times, New York, Monday, March 20th, 1933. Now, keep in mind, 1933, Hitler had just taken power. This is March 20, 1933. My recollection is that the burning of the Reichstag was, well, I could be wrong, but it was very recent. The headline, German fugitives tell of atrocities at hands of Nazis. Keep in mind, 1933. Paris, March 19. Americans are arriving here from Germany, expressing more and more concern over the course of events in that country. Neither the full truth about them nor the implications arising therefrom are reaching the outside world, these Americans say. Nor can the truth come out except gradually and by stealth, and for excellent reasons. The first and most obvious of these is an ironclad censorship, more severe than Germany has ever known except in wartime. Now, keep in mind, this is 1933. You remember 1937 was the year Hitler was on the cover of Time magazine as the most popular politician in the world. This is 1930. He's been in power for less than a year. I read this and I think, okay, what if Trump did hold on to the White House? Back to the New York Times. Not only are all outgoing dispatches from accredited correspondents subjected to the closest scrutiny and passed only when certain objectionable subjects are either untouched or treated so innocuously that Nazi susceptibilities will not be offended thereby, but the sources of all information unfavorable to Nazi interests have dried up. You'll recall Adolf Hitler referred to the press in Germany as the Lügenpresse, the lying press, the fake news. The article continues. Virtually the entire socialist as well as the communist press in Germany is now prohibited. The centrist and neutral press is published under the shadow of instant suppression, should it include even the smallest term objectionable to the official rulers. Germans are forbidden to impart information to foreigners, with the result that none dares to visit, receive, or communicate by telephone with the foreign news writers. Telephone communications are tapped, and even the cafes and restaurants are full of Nazi spies and eavesdroppers. The official Wolff Telegraph Bureau is said to now be wholly in Nazi hands. It was sort of like, the AP of the day. And the other news agencies are not sending out anything but the most innocuous items. Police reports have become worthless. In fact, the police, where they do not ignore the Nazi outrages, actually cooperate with them under the pretext of maintaining law and order. This is Germany, March 20, 1933, the New York Times front page. The government, meaning the National Socialists, control of all news sources and publication outlets. Incidentally, it forbids even mention of the reasons for which any newspaper is suspended, has resulted in the promulgation of what even the Germans are said to regard as transparent fictions. Thus, all the outrages, all the violence now committed by persons, quote, masquerading in Nazi uniforms or, quote, professing to be Nazis, end quote. There is, of course, the New York Times notes, neither masquerading nor pretense. And the fiction, American Visitors Report, deceives no one in Germany. But it does maintain the spirit of Adolf Hitler's recent commands to his followers not to refrain from violence. Is this where we're going? Keep in mind, this is 1933. This was even before Lindbergh was defending Hitler with the American First Movement. Holy cow. When do we learn from history? And stop burning or banning books. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I got a great geeky science for you. Oh, and by the way, so it begins. The Republicans are starting to claim credit for the bills that they worked against. And welcome back. Rachel in Seattle. Hey, Rachel, what's up?
Oh, hi there. I'd almost fallen asleep waiting. Well, no, listening to you. I'm not falling asleep, but you know what I mean.
Thank you.
There was a gentleman who spoke earlier, and he has a winery. Mm-hmm. And there's something interesting that kind of gets left out on things like that. And I grew up family business. But the irony is you've got the wine property that's got the business pays taxes on all property relevant. It includes home if living on same property. Every office product, paper, office stationery, writing implements, filing cabinets and folders, electronic equipment, starting with the obvious calculators, lamps, PCs, and working your way through printers. Then there are the cleaning products, including brooms and vacuums, and anything remotely resembling a ladder and every other tool known to man. Soil known to weekend gardeners, just like the stuff they use the farms for. Everywhere. Fuel, starting with the family cars and down through the big farm equipment. Ever ask yourself what to bring to a friendly get-together with limited funds? Been too broke to pick something up or cook anything worthy of a potluck? Boxed mac and cheese doesn't cut it. Even if you weren't working too many hours for anything but store brand packaged cookies. His wine's already paid for, meaning he's got something to bring. This is part of the whole gentleman farmer. I live surrounded by them on an island, living on beautiful property, even if a few miles off the beaten path, which does nothing but further raise property value minute by minute, giving it more than enough value to nail another business loan.
So is this a Rachel, is this a rant against wineries? I don't understand what you're saying.
What I'm saying is there's a lot of people who are upper middle income, and they're in very good shape, and they're have all these financial breaks, and all they can remember is that they had to pay for it. And I grew up small business, and that's how everything is done.
Yeah, I'm not with you, Rachel. I'm sorry. I'm not going to trash a small vineyard, that was built from scratch, by a family over time with a considerable amount of risk associated with it, because they might be raising local property values. I mean, any kind of business that goes into that area, particularly a business that produces employment, is going to raise property values.
No. That's not what I meant, but I guess I'm not making sense.
No. At least I'm not understanding what you're saying.
You have to have money to make money.
Not always.
And seriously?
Yeah, you can make money by getting a job.
That's not making money. That's getting a job.
Well,
I'm talking private business.
Okay, you don't have to have money to make money. I have started 3 businesses with nothing. One, I started with a $15,000 line of credit on my American Express card. It took me a year to pay it off. Another, I started with absolutely nothing. I mean, I was on unemployment at the time, which I suppose is technically illegal. But I started a business in my bedroom, and an herbal tea company, and built it up, and we eventually had 18 people work. I got off unemployment very quickly, but you don't have to have money to start something. You have to be willing to put time and effort in to start something. In fact, I don't think that I've ever started a business with venture capital or anything like that. I mean, you can make money without money. It's a wonderful thing too. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. As Senator Angus King, the independent from Maine who caucuses with the Democrats, pointed out recently on CNN, if you take the states that the 41 Republican senators who are filibustering everything the Democrats do, he said, if you take the states that those 41 senators represent, add up all the population together, you get 24% of the American people. So the situation now is that 24% of the American people have an effective veto. Now, those 21 states, if you add their population together, they represent 7.2 million people out of 331 million people in the United States, which means that they are representing an even smaller percentage of the American populace. It's around 21%. And if you look at the votes that those 41 senators got, there were 31 million votes total cast in those elections. That's only 11.9%. It's over, the whole video of it is over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and a couple of things I wanted to share with you. The first is our geeky science for the day. This is from Science Daily. The headline, coffee and tea drinking may be associated with reduced rates of stroke and dementia. Which seems, like you would think, okay, caffeine in coffee and tea raises your blood pressure slightly, but shouldn't that increase strokes? It turns out no. Strokes cause 10% of global deaths. This is a big problem, strokes. This is a study that was done in China, in Tianjin. 365,682 participants. They were recruited between 2006 and 2010 and then followed for a 10-year period from 2010 till 2020. Over 360,000 people. Throughout that period of time, a little over 5,000 of them developed dementia, and a little over 10,000 of them had a stroke. So then they looked at the epidemiology of it. Let's look at the numbers. Well, it turns out that the people who drank 2 to 3 cups of coffee or 3 to 5 cups of tea every day, which seems to me like a lot. I mean, I drink 1 cup of coffee in the morning, and that's it for the day. Maybe a half a cup in the afternoon if I really need to juice myself to write my op-ed for the next day. But 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day, 3 to 5 cups of tea a day, or a combination of 4 to 6 cups of coffee and tea, had the lowest incidence of stroke or dementia. Individuals who drank 2 to 3 cups of coffee or 2 to 3 cups of tea had a 32% lower risk of stroke and a 28% lower risk of dementia compared to those who drank neither coffee nor tea. It's remarkable. I would love to know the mechanism involved. Okay, and I mentioned to you also the Republicans are at it again, and so it begins. 19 Senate Republicans and 13 House Republicans voted for the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I think needs a new name. We need to take bipartisan out of it. But anyhow, Congressman Gary Palmer of Alabama wins the distinction of being the very first. He voted against the bill. He campaigned against the bill. Back on November 6th, he said, our economy is struggling and our national debt already presents a serious national security threat, but the Democrats have shown they're willing to recklessly push through a bill that costs over $1 trillion. Quack, 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 quack. It's a Green New Deal wish list. 9 days later, he follows up, another rant. And then he says, now this is 9 days later. It's another rant, but this time he's completely changed his tune. He says, the Appalachian Regional Commission has noted the completion will have an annual economic impact exceeding $2 billion in 10 years and has the potential to create 14,000 new jobs. This is the opportunity we have been working for as a region and as a state. But of course, he had not been working for as a member of Congress. In Arizona, Doug Ducey is doing the same thing. He had just announced $100 million in high-speed broadband investments, even though every single Republican in Congress voted against it. This came out of the Save America bill. I forget what it was called, the American Rescue Plan that was passed back in June. These Republicans have no
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
And what's really bizarre is they'll probably get away with it, because most Americans aren't paying that much attention, and Fox News will never point it out, and that's where the Republican voters go. Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air. End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program that centers around this clip from 1978.
The energy crisis is real. It is worldwide. It is a clear and present danger to our nation. These are facts, and we simply must face them. What I have to say to you now about...
If you go back to the American Rescue Plan, remember that? It was passed in June, as I recall. It was passed last summer, a few months ago. And it did all kinds of great stuff, right? You know, the child tax credit, and it was just a lot of great stuff in there. The Republicans so far who voted against it but have claimed credit for it include Claudia Tenney, Beth Van Dyne, Andrew Garbarino, Madison Cawthorn, Doug LaMalfa. One of the very first, actually, was Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi. He was tweeting about it. Troy Balderson, Anthony Gonzalez, Diane Harshbarger, Jamie Herrera Butler, whatever, Doug LaMalfa, I think I mentioned him, Nicole Maliotakis, Alex Mooney, Troy Nails, N-E-H-L-S, Claudia Tenney, Beth Van Dyne, I mentioned, and Lee Zeldin have all publicly taken credit for the American Rescue Plan that they worked against. It's just breathtaking. Just breathtaking. Anyhow, picking up some of your phone calls. Mark in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom. Love your show. The electric car, I've had one since 2015. Mm-hmm. I've not paid for gas since then, and I've not paid for electricity since I got my solar panels in 2017.
Wow.
Now, but I believe the electric car is an elitist device, and I'll explain to you why if you give me a chance.
Sure.
The working class, if I'm a working class person, I live in an apartment. And even a lot of middle class people live in an apartment. You cannot run a cord and get residential rates from your house or apartment down to the parking lot where your car might be. Can't do it. Now, if I charge at a charging station, I'm paying 4 to 5 times your residential electricity rates here in Oregon, and that's about the equivalent of about a 25-mile per gallon car. So 50 cents a kilowatt hour for a high-speed charge. Now, a high-speed charge takes, at the highest speed you can get, takes about 20 minutes to get 90 miles, or equivalently 3 to 4 gallons of gasoline. If it took 20 minutes to pump 3 to 4 gallons of gasoline for everyone who drove a car, there would be riots in the street.
Yeah, Mark, all of that is...
The only reason I can buy and have an electric car now is because I bought my house in 1985 for 1 year's annual salary. I live in that same house today at my highest income in my life. The house is worth 5 times my annual salary. I could never afford it.
Right, but you don't live in an apartment now. You live in a house. You've got solar panels. You're charging your car for free. Mark, I don't disagree with your premise that at this moment, for many people, an electric car
is
an elitist thing. Yeah, well, I think that's why Joe Biden is saying let's put 500,000 charging stations out there. Number one. Number two, I'm telling you, Mark, if you keep track, yes, they will. If you keep track of what's going on with charging, just last week it was announced that there's a new cable that can handle 500 amps of juice. I mean, obviously this is early development stuff, but I predict within 2 years, you are going to see cars that will charge in the period of time that you would normally stop at a gas station. I predict it's going to happen within 2 years. And so this, I think you could argue, your argument that electric cars are elitist, sure. So were cars in the 1890s, the 1900s, and the 19-teens. But then they became normal for everybody. What you're describing is actually in marketing. It's called the marketing curve. You have the early adopters, right? The people who are willing to take on a new technology and try something out. The very first people to buy an iPhone, with a little hard drive in it that half the time didn't work. And then you've got the early mass market. The people who will buy the first one that's really a good commercial product that comes out, and then you've got the middle mass market, and then you got the later mass market, and then you got the late adopters. And electric cars are right now somewhere between early adopter and early mass market. In fact, they're rapidly becoming early mass market. They're going to become middle mass market within a relatively short period of time. So, you know, I get your article, your premise. I don't disagree with it in principle, but I think you're completely overlooking the fact that we are in the midst of a radical transition in the United States. Dave in Del Mar, Maryland. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom.
Hey, Dave.
You just woke me up. I was taking a nap.
Right.
Sorry, I fell asleep waiting. How are you out there? Are you affected by the floods any?
What's your point, Dave? What'd you call about?
Okay, I wanted to talk about the book banning, book burning. I'm totally against it. Although we do have a backup. We do have a backup in the internet, and the young people, as much as they are apprised of the internet, they will get that information from the internet. It's nothing but the truth.
If they want it. I mean, here's the problem. A teacher can say, you must read this book about Harriet Tubman, and particularly a white kid who may have no interest in Harriet Tubman will read that book because it was assigned. I don't think that same white kid who, you know, lives in a largely white bubble is going to be searching out literature on, you know, Harriet Tubman's life unless he happens to watch the movie.
True to some extent, Tom, but young minds are inquisitive. Do you agree with me?
I do.
Young minds are inquisitive.
I do, but you know, I think they're more likely to be looking for porn than to be looking for, you know, the racial history of America.
Okay, maybe.
But I get your point, Dave. You know, no book burning or banning is ever going to be completely effective. But what these people are trying to do is they're trying to change what we're teaching in the schools. It's not the books so much that they're going after; it's the teachers. They're trying to terrify the teachers, and that is a real problem. Dave, thank you for the call. Nancy in Elkhart, Indiana. Hey, Nancy, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Tom. This is connected exactly to what you were just saying. In my town, when I was listening to you say about the book that you read, the Jailbreak Out of History, you mentioned, one of the women you mentioned was Mary Daly. And I had been doing some research on where our schools in Elkhart got their name. And one of our schools happens to be Mary Daly. And I don't think anybody hardly at all knew that was, I'm sure that's who that was named after. And she was an American radical feminist. But she described herself as, and this is what I got when I looked online some time ago, and she described herself as a radical lesbian feminist.
Whoa. Back in the day.
And, yes, and she was born in 1928.
Right.
And she actually graduated, and this is why I wrote this down, because I wanted to tell you that I don't even know. She had graduated. Oh, she was born like in Schenectady or something, and she taught at the Boston College, and she actually graduated from the Catholic University of America. And she was actually they called her, you know, a forward philosopher, and I don't think she's ever gotten any I guess you'd say any attention.
Formal recognition, as it were. Yeah.
And I thought, just like you said, you're not going to ban kids from learning things. Being a teacher, half the stuff I taught wasn't even out of books.
But you can terrify teachers.
I think you can now, especially today. The way they terrify representatives.
Yeah, and school boards. No, I mean, I think, you know, the banning books is like the stuff that's visible. But what these people who are trying to, you know, the Moms for Liberty types, really what they're trying to do is they're trying to terrify teachers. They're trying to make sure that the racial history of America is not taught, because they're very comfortable with white supremacy. They like white supremacy. They like a system that is, you know, based in white supremacy, and they want to hang on to it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I got to run. Nancy, thanks for the call. Fascinating history, by the way, Mary Daly. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann program, helping you win the water cooler wars. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, there are some of us still out there, or here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. LaDonna in Ash Fork, Arizona. It says you're correcting something. What's up?
Biden didn't shut down Enbridge 3.
Okay.
He shut down the northern part of the Keystone.
Oh, thank you.
And so then they decided to put it across the top of the east. You know, the tar sands. That's what it is.
Right. It's running across Canada. Yeah.
No, it's running into America by a Canadian company.
Right.
It's running through the top of Indian land in America.
Thank you for that. Thank you, LaDonna.
Okay, yeah. You know, but you got on the other side the climate deniers, the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And like 10 years ago, I said, next they're going to say, oh, well, we believe in climate change, but it's not man-made. Well, I heard one the other day, a Republican saying, oh, well, we believe in climate change, but it's not man-made. So they're just gonna run the world into the ground, before they do anything.
Oh, that's their plan. Take as much money as possible.
Oh, yeah.
It's a psychopathology. It's these people are.
Yep, and I heard
sick.
that the gas prices are because Biden called Saudi Arabia and asked them to raise production, and they won't. But they did every time when Trump called them, because Trump loved, Mr. Bonesaw.
Yep.
It just makes me so angry,
Yeah.
But I just wanted to correct that. I wish he had shut that down.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Well, thank you, LaDonna.
It's gonna contribute a lot to climate change, and
yeah,
he should have shut that down. But I'm sure that Trump and the Canadian Prime Minister is the one that set that deal up.
Yeah.
And then Biden came in. They were already probably starting the operation by the time he got in there.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's a tough one for Justin Trudeau. LaDonna, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Kirk in Bremerton, Washington. Hey, Kirk, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, as a former Tesla owner and a Ford Lightning reservation holder, I can't wait for this electric revolution to kick into high gear.
Is the Ford Lightning the pickup truck?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's going to be cool. Brings me to Joe Manchin on the subject of union-made electric vehicles, and he's telegraphing once again that once the House passes Build Back Better, he's going to do his best to tank it in the Senate.
Yeah.
I have this idea, and I wondered what you thought the feasibility of it was, and that would be maybe a public pressure campaign to President Biden, who would then redirect that pressure to Chuck Schumer to pull Joe Manchin from his Energy Committee seat and replace him with Lisa Murkowski. She seems to be a person who's very desirable as kind of a political wild card right now. The Republican Congressional or Senatorial Committee for 2022 is going very hard after her, trying to get her under their wing, and she's stood out a few times before. But would that even be possible? And if so, how would we pull it off?
That's interesting. I honestly don't know. I mean, I would say broadly, yes, it's possible. What I don't know is, and I don't think anybody knows right now, outside of a small circle of people in Washington, D.C., is how amenable Lisa Murkowski may be to, like Angus King, starting to become, as an independent, to start caucusing with the Democrats, and how probable it is that Joe Manchin, if he were to lose his committee seats, would start caucusing with the Republicans, would declare himself an independent. Both of those things are possible. The probability of either one of them, though, I don't know. But it's interesting speculation. Thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video op-ed over at thomhartmann.com. So have you ever heard of molnupiravir? It's a new drug that actually looks like it reduces the probability that you will end up hospitalized or dead from COVID-19. It's a 5-day course. You take a pill every day for 5 days. It costs Merck, the company that is selling it, $17.74 to make that 5-day, 5 pills. And they are selling it to you and me, to the federal government, for $712 per 5 pills, per, treatment course. And you say, what? And here's where it gets really interesting. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is part of the Department of Defense, provided $10 million of funding to Emory University to develop this drug, and $19 million in additional grants came from the National Institutes of Health. We paid to develop this drug, and now we're going to pay $700 for it? Really? Check it out. There's a video over at thomhartmann.com all about it. Welcome back. Linda in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I was just listening about the book burning. It's not just about that. My daughter's a teacher, and she says that when they did the e-learning, that parents started sitting next to them listening and then saying, your teacher said this, your teacher said that. Their school is very, the area she teaches in is very Republican, and they are watching these teachers and trying to trip them up. My daughter said critical race is not taught in the school, but now you're even afraid to mention slavery or any kind of thing that a kid can go back to their parents and say they talked about slavery, even if you're putting it in the context of truth.
I wonder, Linda, and a caller earlier kind of challenged this notion, and I'm uncertain about it, frankly. I wonder if all of this focus on explicitly stopping any discussion in our public schools about our racial history is, what is the long-term effect of this going to be? Are the Republicans going to be successful at changing the educational structure of the schools across America so that basically we no longer talk about race, we no longer teach race, and therefore their white republic can live again, like in the 1950s, and eventually, push black people out of, public schools and out of the neighborhoods and out of the workplace and everything else, which I think is, frankly, is their end goal? Or are these young people going to say, what the hell? They don't want me to learn what? And, and it's going to get around, and 10 years from now, you're going to have a whole generation of school kids, or 15 years from now, who actually know a hell of a lot more about race than most all the rest of us combined. What do you think?
Well, I just want to say, when my daughter said when she went to college, and she's 40, when she went to college, she found out who Christopher Columbus was. And she said, I was so mad that I felt lied through to all my life, that this was the man who discovered America, and he was wonderful and all that. And he was horrible, she said.
Yeah, he was a racist, rapist, slave trader.
Right. And I will say this. I went to Hawaii many years ago, and I went to Pearl Harbor, and that's manned by a lot of the Army guys in that. Right. And when I went there were a lot of Japanese people, and I said to the man, what do they say since this is a place they bombed? It's scary. They told me that he that they would.
Linda, you're fading out. I don't know what's going on, but you are fading out. Linda, I think your phone has gone nuts. I'm going to move along, but thank you for the call. Norm in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Norm, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
I keep hearing this issue about critical race. The issue, and that's a graduate school, quote unquote. What we suffer from in our elementary school is a lack of teaching critical science and math, and particularly critical civics is what they need to bring in these courses and stuff to get people to the level of graduate programs and stuff. When these people call in, just ask these folks who up and down about critical race. Wait a minute. Do you know the 3 branches of government? Critical math. Do you know what an isosceles triangle is? These are the things that our country is failing. When I listen to these people and those sort of things, so I think that one thing that the left can do, or the progressive can do, is say, in our Build Back Better program, we have designed it so that our schools will improve in terms of our facilities and our education, where we'll be teaching math and science and physics and civics in our school. When you ask most of these folks to call in anything, and I'm being redundant about civics, who's the head of the legislative branch? Do you know what the legislative branch is? They will know nothing. But the minute you put in, oh, good God, the race, oh, here they come now, they're ready to go. Critical, the narrative can be changed by the folks on the progressive if they talk about what we're not teaching in our public schools, which is the basic science and math and civics. And
I think, and in the context of civics and history, you can't understand civics without history. And you can't understand history without knowing the racial history of the United States, as well as all the other dimensions of the history of the United States. And so I would say all of that goes under the rubric of civics. And there are some people out there who are, really pushing for civics, better civics education in the United States ever since our nationwide civics curriculum was basically gutted by Bill Bennett, back during the Reagan era. So,
and they just want to get hung up on race, which is an easy narrative to push.
Sure. No, it's just meta for their racism, basically. I mean, it's really what's going on. Thanks so much, and thank you, Norm, for the call. Thank you so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure everybody you know is registered to vote. There's an election coming up in 12 months, and we need to get ready. So tag you're it, and have a great afternoon this afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleep and pain relief. More info is available at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Ground News, a well-rounded perspective for news readers. More info at ground.news/Tom. Angie, for any project on your to-do list. More info at Angie.com. Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com. And ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom.